you know, we thought it would be clearer and aligned with the federal rules if we said, well, rather than, you know, policy's a little bit vague. What does that mean? It could mean anything. Why don't you just go ahead and adopt the FCC's rules on both traditional enhanced make-ready and one-touch make-ready? That's what our Amendment 19A1 does. And as to rates, which we have in our amendment on 19A2, the prior bill, I mean H.513 as it came over, said, let's see, where's it? Let's see, where's the fair and reasonable rates?
Right, you again hinge to the feds.
Right. Yes, there was a provision H.513 also about fair and reasonable rates. And what we're now saying is that concept was in there. As to one-touch make-ready, we're just being more specific. Go ahead and adopt the federal rules. And as to fair and reasonable rates, we're saying adopt the federal rules.
Okay.
And so that we're, you know, other than that, all the concepts, we're not disputing any of the concepts. We're just,
Saying we should do the
Consolidating.
federal rules rather than work around trying to
and I
do
think
something
we
on our own.
cleaned it up a little bit, you know.
Okay.
Madam Chair, may I just ask, Dylan,
Let that-
some of this is a little confusing for me. Dylan's a good translator.
Sure.
Sometimes for those of us who aren't in the middle of some of the legal stuff. Can you simplify a little bit of this?
This, I will do my best. This provides greater direction to the PUC by directing them to implement the federal, the FCC rules, rather than, to Jim's point, implement what could be interpreted to be an ambiguous definition of one-touch make-ready.
Okay.
A complex process that could be put Vermont out of line with other states that deal with the same exact scenarios that we do here in Vermont.
And also rates, but we know that even we retain the phrase adopted any other revisions deemed relevant by the commission. So if, you know, we're setting out a target, if they need to change something, they can do it.
Okay.
Just,
Senator Bell.
yes, just curious if we know why the House didn't just defer to the FCC rules. What was the thought?
No, we'll, once we get the questions,
Lots of real good reasons.
okay,
Well-
we will ask them. I think we had them down to do the original presentation. We asked them to come down and tell us what their thought process was, okay? Senator Pierce.
I don't know much about the FCC, but I haven't really been impressed. What I do know over the last couple of decades, their view on public airwaves, for instance, has not been a robust defense of the public. So I guess I'm curious about, I can see from your point of view the simplicity of what you're proposing here, but I can imagine us taking the time to really understand what's set forth in the rules, in the federal rules as they stand. I'm more hesitant to pin something to those rules that could have an ongoing evolution. I'm wondering if you have comments about that, or if there would be a static reference, how you would feel about that.
Well, what I would say to that is that we have, as you can see in sub 5, given the PUC the ability to look at the FCC rules and determine which aspects of those rules are and are not appropriate for the state of Vermont, but it provides a baseline from which to operate. I believe some of the, without speaking for the intent of the House, my understanding from being in the room during some of those conversations is that there was a desire to get something back to the PUC in a timely manner. Some of the proceedings before the PUC tend to drag on for a period of time longer than some stakeholders are satisfied with, and I think that is the date that is included there for by which the PUC must deliver a rule to the legislature to help her. And so giving them a baseline from which to start is helpful, and they can look at and make a determination from there, and that is what sub 5 does.
Well, but you're not saying adopt the FCC rules to the extent you want to. It says, your language says, shall revise rule as follows: adopt the FCC rules, and then you say other revisions deemed relevant. So you're not giving them flexibility within the FCC rules in this language, right?
I think that depends on how you read any other revisions.
Well, I understand what any other revisions are, but you haven't given them flexibility in A1. Revisions.
For alleged councils to whether they see
All right.
that.
Is it your intention to give them flexibility to start with the FCC rules and then modify them? Or are you saying adopt FCC rules?
We would like to see them adopt the FCC rules, but practically, we understand that Vermont has its own interest and may want to vary from those, so we'd be comfortable with moving that language into A1 if that would make it clearer.
I think it's clear. Heard what you would like.
Concept.
Okay. Okay. Any other questions?
If anyone's interested, this is, the FCC one touch make ready proceeding is very long, lots of parties. It's a long read, if anyone's interested.
Okay, I'm sure we can get, yeah, if you want to
Okay,
get
yes.
one copy, they can get it for us. Pass this up. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, Stan Williams,
Did we do that?
ValleyNet.
For coming back. We always appreciate your input.
Okay. All right, Mr. Williams, welcome.
Hi, thank you. So for the record, my name is Stan Williams. I'm chairman of the board of ValleyNet and chief financial officer. I'm wearing my ECFiber button, but ValleyNet is actually the nonprofit operating partner for ECFiber. ECFiber has no employees, and the bond markets like it that way. So as a nonprofit, we started as a dial-up provider in the Upper Valley, and have morphed into this, service provider to currently ECFiber. We're going to provide service to Lyme, New Hampshire in 2020, and are talking with other towns and districts like CVFiber about expanding the ECFiber model throughout Vermont. So I'm going to speak specifically to the financing provisions in H.513 because that's my expertise and background. I was also one of the original co-founders of ECFiber and had a substantial investment to get the thing running. And I'll talk about ECFiber's path to that in relation to how it might affect the funding provisions of H.513. So as we define the problem, we look at any area that's not served by cable, sort of a hybrid fiber coax system or fiber is unserved. And that's what the state telecom plan does too. It sets out a goal of 100-100. So I don't know why we're talking about 25.3 in this bill as a starting point. 100-100 means fiber or hybrid fiber coax, and I think that should be the goal of the state. Otherwise, I'm going to be here in 5 years explaining why we're spending a lot of money to try to upgrade copper 25.3 locations to 100-100, and we all know it's very expensive. So on that basis, the telecom plan data says that 40,000 of Vermont's 300,000 households have fiber or hybrid fiber coax. That leaves 260,000 households, and we're able to run fiber inexpensively relative to other carriers, but our cost per passing per household is about $2,000. So in our estimation, Vermont has a $500 million problem. You're not going to solve that by giving $1 million in connectivity grants to various carriers every year. We'll solve it, it'll take 500 years. So the way ECFiber's done it was we've used startup financing, repaid it, and then leveraged the municipal bond markets so far to the extent of $32 million, and in 2 years we'll have raised $50 million in that market and covered 1,400 miles of pretty underserved areas. We have to go through some cabled areas where it's necessary to go through unserved areas, but the first priority is to reach the unserved areas. The state did contribute a little bit eventually to us, about $1 million in connectivity grants over time. And the dark fiber network that we had access to is about 100 miles of fiber that saved us about $2 million. So, you know, the state's investment in ECFiber is essentially $3 million, and at the end of it, we'll have attracted $50 million in capital, which I think is a pretty good return and should, you know, be attractive to the Democrats and Republicans in our legislature. The way we did it, though, without any state help from financing, even though we tried to talk to the VTA about bonding authority and everything else, was we ended up raising $7 million in sort of a crowd financing scheme where if you wanted fiber on your road and you could raise $30,000 of capital and find 5 customers, we would build that network. It looked very messy and it wasn't very efficient, but we raised $7 million of money that way and got to the point where we were attracted to the municipal capital markets. And but that took 6 years. It was very slow. It was inefficient because we were building not towns but roads and neighborhoods. And it was costly. The interest rates we had to offer, even though ECFiber, when I say we, it's ECFiber offering the debt, and it's tax-free, ranged from 7 to 11%, and it was short-term debt for a network of this size. It was 15 years. But we built 300 miles, had 1,000 customers, and had positive EBITDA in 2014. So in 2016, we were able to, ECFiber was able to attract municipal capital markets, is the name of our underwriter in Denver, and they were able to issue debt to us in small tranches, which is typically not what Wall Street banks do. They like to raise money in hundreds of millions of dollars. And we were able to do that because the sort of 6 rough requirements were we had calculated earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization. We had 3 years of audited financials. We had stable metrics in terms of customers per mile, take rate, improving margins, low churn, et cetera, et cetera. We had local commitment demonstrated through the volunteers on the governing board and all the local investors, which were repaid in 2017 with interest and penalties. And ECFiber is large enough that it's a size that's a scale that supports an infrastructure. You can't do this stuff town by town. It's just too small. And even ECFiber is a tiny ISP. I mean, we have 3,500 customers now. If we continue to achieve take rates of at least 5 per mile, we'll have 7,000 in 2 years, but that's still fairly tiny. So, you know, we were thinking about how to do this, and someone asked me, Ted Brady from the Agency of Commerce and Community Development called and said, well, what should these revolving loans look like? And I gave him our structure, and a lot of that idea seemed to have made it into this bill. I have a couple, you know, tweaks to it that I would suggest, starting with the fact that
What page are you on, do you know?
excuse me?
Do you know what page or section you're on, so we can, loans. I think you may be in the Vita section.
Yes. The broadband and, not the grant program, broadband expansion.
Section 15, page 17. Okay, page 17, broadband expansion, section 14, okay. Now we
So
can take that.
loans may be made in the amount of $1.8 million, along with a 10% public match. That would give a startup district $2 million. That is too small. It took us $7 million to get to the public markets. I think we took longer than we should have, and you know, I think the new districts can do it a little less expensively using what we've learned. But I'd like to see that number, a higher number. You don't need them all at once. You should also be available to be loaned in tranches. So the first year you can pay for make ready on X miles, the next year you pay for construction on X miles, and then make ready on the next tranche. And so you use the money over time.
Is there an amount that starts to make sense for you?
I would say $4 million. So at our build cost of $30,000 a mile, that will build 130 miles and yield approximately 600 customers. I mean, I haven't talked to the underwriters, but that's a sufficient scale, I think, where they can start to take these loans out, because these are supposed to be short-term bridge loans to the public markets. You don't want VITA to have a 20-year loan. The idea is to take that $4 million and leverage it into $40 million of municipal bonds that builds the rest of the network once the district is at a point where it's sort of stable and operating. And that's the beauty of this model, is that you can solve a $500 million problem by risking 20 or maybe a little bit more of state, loan money. And I'll argue with the idea that these are high-risk loans, which it says in there that there is risk. I think we've proven the risk is not particularly high. So my proposal will be $4 million, but again, we can work with this next year. I'm looking at this through the lens of what will it take for ValleyNet to help Central Vermont Fiber get going and take advantage of this loan program like next year. And we don't have a formal arrangement with them, but we're directly contiguous to them, and we can really help them get started.
That was mentioned yesterday that they were working.
Okay. So the other major problem is that you've constrained where these loans are available so minutely with the 25.3 and 10.1 and unserved goals, is that you can confirm this with Clay Purvis, but I went through the data from the state telecommunications plan, and I think the loans would be available to only there's 255 towns in the state. I think 117 of the towns would be eligible in some way, but it would only represent 23% of the locations in the state. So it's pretty limited. The way we're doing it at ECFiber is we basically build around any cable infrastructure that's in the center of town and serve what we call the donut in most of the towns, and that's what I think ECFiber would do as well. But just to be specific, I think only 5 of the 17 ECFiber towns would qualify using these standards, and they're dispersed and they're very small, and you couldn't build them in a chunk, so it would be a very inefficient way to start. And the town we've actually targeted, Roxbury, which has 94.4% of locations receiving 4.1, would be excluded because it doesn't have more than 10% of its locations. And so I think those need to be revisited for them to be useful from our perspective. Now, we may not be the only operator that's doing this, but that's my take, and Clay has some ideas about how you might modify that. I think you could explicitly say, don't go into cabled areas because they're essentially served already, but the current standards don't work. I can send you the spreadsheet, and you can talk with Clay if you'd like. The second point is that by their very nature, these statistics are using self-reported speed statistics from the incumbents, and I would tell you that they're notoriously overstated, and I'm just not making it up, but anyone that has DSL in particular can attest to the fact that if they're paying for 7.1, they're not getting it, et cetera, et cetera. So the 2 data points I would give you is, in the UK, they passed an act that said that you had to provide the speed you were promising at least 50% of the time. And the ISPs in the UK dropped their listed speeds by between 15 and 40% on average. The second piece next door in New York was that Charter settled an agreement with the Attorney General about a lawsuit that it had defrauded customers by delivering slower than advertised speeds. The amount of the settlement was $170 million. I talked to them, I sent the AG a note. They didn't seem interested in pursuing this. All seems like a good source of funds. Maybe you could fund the broadband loan program with that. Not that we get 170, but proportionally it would be some large amount per month. And the uptake of the suit was that the premium data speeds were as much as 70% slower than advertised. I mean, ECFiber specifically over-provisioned so that when our base rate 25.25, if you're plugged in or you're very close to your Wi-Fi and it's fast enough, you're getting 25.25. You can see it on a speed test, and you're getting it throughout the day, not just at 3 a.m. when no one else is using the system. So the peak hours are between 8 and 10. So go home, do a speed test, and see if your ISP is actually giving you the speeds available. But I'm just saying that the base policy on those speeds is, to me, dangerous. And this speaks to another provision that I'm not supposed to be talking about directly, but if Clay Purvis had more horsepower in his division, he could do what he did with the false claims about mobile wireless coverage and do the same thing about wired broadband
You don't work for the
speeds.
governor, so you can say anything you
Okay.
want.
Well, I do like what Clay did there, and it would be nice to have some government agency, you know, policing this,
Ground
because,
truthing it, like what is the actual speed?
well, because as Herb loves to say, you don't go into the, you know, store and buy up to a pound of butter, so, you know. I love that quote.
That's good,
That's from John Roy.
that's
Yes.
good.
So,
Who got it?
Is it really?
as I said, I think the money should be available in tranches. I don't think they're high risk. I mean, even Burlington Telecom, which sort of was the genesis of this project, because I hired Tim and Leslie Nolte, et cetera, a completely different situation. They overbuilt an existing cable operator, they intermingled funds with the towns, and they did a lot of underground in the north end that was really expensive, that we would never do. Underground costs order of magnitude higher than $30,000 a mile, but even they recovered 33 cents on the dollar when they were sold. So, you know,
We also had a lot of regulatory strangeness that others do not have. I think it's fair to say.
so,
Side
you know, that's my summary. I wanted to leave time for you guys to ask questions.
Okay. Okay, so we're too restrictive on describing what time.
It's gonna make it difficult for a district to get started using those restrictive tests.
Okay.
And I'd like to see larger amounts available, because again, you don't wanna see a lot of small districts that are uneconomic.
Right.
I don't know the exact size, but ECFiber and CVFiber are about the right size. AC is 24 towns, CV is 17, and so you could work backwards into the number of uncovered towns in the state. I don't think we need 10 small CUDs, you probably need 5 or 6 or 7, you know, relatively larger ones.
Can you
Line them
just-
up with your school district.
Can you just orient me to the language that is that particular notation that?
Well, there's two tests, so they,
That's on page 19.
there's some staff, thank you. Requirements, the authority shall make startup loans, expansion, blah, blah, blah. So,
10% of the customers.
Page 20.
access.
ensure that the provider offers speeds of at least 25 down and 3 up. So I think that should be 100, but you guys can make that whatever you want. The second test is 33% of the providers, potential customers have to have access to broadband speeds that are less than 10, and 10% have to have less speeds that are less than 4.1, which disqualifies a town like Roxbury, which I don't think anyone would consider to be a served community. It has no cable, and 94% of the residents are getting what Consolidated says is 4.1. I don't know if it's 4.1 or not. If you go far enough out from a D plan, you might not get that. So that to me is very
Cell service is spotty and your GPS doesn't work at all. Unless you want to get
Well,
very lost.
one
And
problem
so-
at a time.
And so would you just take all that out and talk about the 100?
I would like to see 100, because, I mean, I know Michael Birnbaum would like to see some allowance, because I think, look, this won't work in all parts of the state, because there's areas of the Northeast Kingdom where the linear density is less than, say, 6 to 8 houses a mile. Our density, excluding Hartford and Montpelier, is 14, and that's kind of average for the state, but I'm not gonna say that this model is financially sustainable and fiber works at that low density without some ongoing
Yeah,
support,
there
but,
was some tested more yesterday about the difference
yeah.
in cost per mile with the different speeds.
So, yes, I mean, I have a couple ideas. You can play with the spreadsheet and change some of the percentages, but I mean, I think the 4.1 provision is silly. I don't know, one talks about 4.1 anymore at all, and I would modify the other one to, and look at CEFiber specifically and see what would cover a reasonable number of households and towns in their area to make it possible for them to start. Because again, if you restrict them to 5 very small towns that are discontiguous, I can tell you it's difficult operationally to make that work. And frankly, the easiest thing from our perspective is just to extend the ECFiber network from Brookfield, and we're already in Roxbury, we had 18 locations, to get to another part of Brookfield, and do a town like Roxbury that's contiguous to us. We don't need a headquarters up in Barry. We build it for CEFiber, we build another town, and then when we get enough towns, then we'll have a separate, hub and center up in Barry, or something in the center of the district. The constraint for us is truck rolls. You can't make the district so big that you have to drive a truck 2 hours. And we go now from Royalton to West Windsor, that's about as far as we want to go, it's expensive. But that's another reason for doing one make ready, just environmentally, having 4 trucks go out to touch the same pole is silly. I do think you should not adopt the FCC federal rules. They have some problems with it. And my frustration financially with it has been, we borrow a ton of money, we pay to make ready, we're paying interest on it. We need the network to get online to start generating revenue to pay the interest back. Because again, we're not having any state or taxpayer funds here, we've got bondholders. And I'm told that either GMP or Consolidated has delayed the entire town of Thetford, which now has the most customers of any of the towns in the network. This year it happens to be Brookfield, and last year I think it was CCI, this year it's GMP. It's difficult to run a business when you invest a large amount of money up front and then buy a bunch of fiber and stuff, and it's sitting in a warehouse and you're paying interest on it. So that's been the biggest problem that we've had operationally is delays from make ready. I mean, some of it's self-inflicted. We're a small startup and that happens, but largely it's make ready. And the fact that there's no consequences for delays in make ready, I just don't know how we can have a regulation without consequences. And that's what we have now. So whatever you do will make it better, right?
We need to have consequences, okay. All right, questions? Okay, thank you.
I appreciate your time.
Yeah.
Can I ask Greg
Yeah.
a question from PUC quickly?
If Greg wants to be interrogated.
Sure. Greg, I'm curious, we talked about the cost of stringing lines, and it's a rental payment, mostly to Green Mountain Power, because they own a lot of poles. Is that cost, and then it's been suggested that it's a bit of a strange system because, let's say Comcast goes up there, and then someone else comes along, and they're paying rental costs too, and I don't believe the first renter gets a reduction in cost. It's a fixed cost, it's a pole sitting there. My question is, are those rental charges part of Green Mountain Power's rate review, or are they sort of outside of their regulatory constraint?
I don't know the answer to that. I can get back to you with them.
Okay.
I would appreciate that.
Irv thinks he knows.
The rates that are charged for renting space on the poles are subject to PUC regulation.
Okay.
And there is a proceeding that is now 2 3/4 years old, attempting to establish a uniform rate for all tenants on the pole, regardless of what service they provide. It's been dragging on for 2 3/4 years.
Okay,
But it may or may not protect ratepayers, right?
It will protect if electric ratepayers, yes. That's one of the biggest bones of contention, is how to modify these rates and hold the ratepayers harmless.
the ratepayers.
Maybe we could ask Greg to come
Yeah.
back.
They have already asked to have Green Mountain Power and at least the municipal electrics to come in and.
Question.
Yeah.
Go through the polls.
Little
actual
question.
rules.
Yes.
In the several years that you've been waiting for this to be resolved, are you obliged to pay the rates that they have
We pay.
established in the meantime?
Yes, we pay as if we're using 2 feet of space. We aren't, but we
And
pay as if we were.
if the regulations are fixed in the future, will you be retroactively reimbursed?
No.
So you're,
But
to the extent you were
Going
treated
forward,
and
we
continues?
expect we'll end up paying for everybody will probably end up paying for about 1.5 nominal theoretical feet to hold the ratepayers harmless. But exactly what that number is
What's the
unclear.
question?
Yeah.
When it's resolved, do you expect to see lower rates?
We do, slightly.
So it's in the interest of the people that own the poles to drag everything out.
It is indeed.
They get to hold your money,
Yeah.
they can charge you higher rates until it's resolved,
Yeah.
and you can't earn income until you get up on the poles.
That's also true.
Yeah,
And-
so that's appears to be what's going on, and either that's happening by accident or deliberate.
Well, and
Okay, we're not, that's beyond our.
I didn't mean to rattle on, but that question's been on my mind.
could I, Madam Chair?
No, I've got.
We don't know the answer to that question.
Right, I've
No,
got John
there's a
Gregg
possibility.
next. We it's time at the
I
end,
don't think
or
he's
you
here.
can talk, but you had your time.
I believe,
And this is a different topic.
Yeah, okay, no, I'll have you in at the end.
So,
So I apologize, I got my testimony and text submissions in late. Faith was good enough to print them out for you all.
so one of each.
I'm sorry,
Oh,
I have them
package.
set up, so you have
Okay.
your packets all set up. I did take the liberty to dog eat ear. A page on there, which we'll get to. Oh my God, computer finder's fired up. So for the record, I'm John Brabant, and I'm the Regulatory Affairs Director for Vermonters for a Clean Environment. I want to thank the committee for allowing me to testify today on such short notice. And I want to also thank you for having Dr. Shauna Atra in yesterday. She covered more specifically the science concerns regarding 5G, and that's what I'm here to speak to generally about 5G. But my hope is to, is the little time I will have with you today, to kind of brief you on the FCC, its makeup. The term captured came up yesterday, Senator, and you wondered what that meant, or you learned about what that meant. And I thought that I could give you a little presentation like was done yesterday. I thought that was unique, and I said I'm going to borrow from that by playing some excerpts of testimony by former FCC chair, the current FCC chair, and Senator Blumenthal from Connecticut. And I think you, in the short time that you watch these 3 video clips, you'll learn an awful lot about the backdrop, what's led to the current FCC edict, as it were, with regard to the rollout of One Touch Make Ready for 5G. I know there's been a representation regarding H.513 that it does not have anything to do with 5G, and that the intent is to roll out optical fiber cable around the state and assist in that rollout. And Vermonters for a Clean Environment is strongly supportive of that. We'd like to see that. And I should, by the way, give you a little background on who I am, a little out of order here. In addition to working for Vermonters for a Clean Environment, I'm a 15-year Select Board Vice Chair, Cal Select Board. Some of you know that, some of you might not. And I also was a 25-year regulator at the Agency of Natural Resources. I'm trained in hydrogeology, and prior to my term with the Agency of Natural Resources, I worked as a contaminant hydrogeologist. So I'm pretty well versed in reading science, and as a regulator for 25 years, know how to read law and have actually written bills that are now law. So I provided you a bulleted outline, which is all I put together for today's presentation. So I've already said that 513, as I understand it, as I think has been represented in discussions around this committee table, was intended and is intended to assist in the rollout of optical fiber. Ms. Atra, Dr. Atra, yesterday requested that the committee do a strike all on the term broadband and replace it with fiber to premises, FTTP. I actually have attached to this a copy of the House version. I did my best to convert from a PDF to a Word version. It did a decent job. The formatting's a little goofy. But if you look at that document for a moment, you'll see that in bold and double underline are terms I've added to make clear the intent of this bill. If it in fact has nothing to do with 5G, then let's just say that it's about fiber to the premises and or optical fiber development around the state. There's been a notion also kind of discussed around the State House halls. As late as yesterday, I was told that fiber optic is not coming to Vermont. It's too rural. And I'll alert you too, in case you already know, President Trump has already stated that he's going to commit a minimum of $20 billion with a B
to the rollout of 5G so that we can get into rural areas to help our farmers navigate their tractors on those big Midwestern fields. So, you know, what is 5G? 5G is kind of a smaller form, as I understand it. I'm not an expert in this, and I don't want anyone to think I'm an expert in this. I just know what I've learned fairly recently. It's a less powerful form of what comes off a cell tower. It's a microwave signal, radio frequency, and one of the big problems with it, as you know, it gets mounted on a pole. It's a pole mount technology, and it's brought down to the near ground level. And it's going to be every other pole, depending on the situation. It's going to be highly dense in terms of its development and rollout. So let's see here. So the health risks. What are the health risks with 5G? You know, long document came up here. You bear with me.
But did we get most of that yesterday?
It was just different.
Yeah. Okay. Well, here's one question that's asked by a U.S. Senator. Not the one I wanted. This is the current chair of the FCC.
We are not the health experts when it comes to these issues. We've consulted, of course, with the Federal Food and Drug Administration and with others who are responsible for determining what those standards should be. We are confident that our standards are ones that are healthy for consumers. The wireless industry is rolling out powerful 5G technology throughout the United States. However, some say it should avoid between
That's good enough for me.
There are studies that have been developed. This is not.
Okay, I'm not sure
Yeah,
what
okay.
we're watching, and I
Okay.
know that the record can't pick it
Yeah.
up.
Yeah. Okay.
And I don't have any names or information to go with
Okay.
those voices.
Okay. So let me stop this then. So I'll suggest, because it's not going to work, my computer presentation. Remember not to do that. Senator Blumenthal held a hearing back this February, and he met with officials from the wireless industry, the telecommunication industry, and asked them point blank in a Senate hearing whether or not this technology has been studied in terms of its human health effects and public safety risks. And in addition to the dodging, they eventually answered by saying, two different individuals who were interviewed, that the industry has not performed any studies. We rely on the FDA. The FDA has performed no such studies. The FDA is, their most recent statement of a few years, of 2013, is that that studies need to be performed on this, and the FCC needs to evaluate those studies and incorporate any concerns in its regulations as they go forward with this technology. Nothing has been done. As you know, we are in 2019. Just a little background about the FCC. The former chair, Tom Wheeler, I had a little segment there, and Ms. Artra yesterday mentioned his statement that and that any claim that the technology is not safe, he's going to disregard, that we need to roll this out, and we need to roll it out with due haste. So that was his policy objective. His prior job was with the CTIA. You may have heard testimony from them here. So this goes to the statement of capture, regulatory capture. He was replaced by the current chair, Ajit Pai. He was former general counsel to Verizon. He was appointed by President Obama to the FCC and at the behest of Senator Mitch McConnell. So the legislature up to this point, and to my knowledge, has done nothing in terms of the few bits of testimony provided by myself now and the speakers yesterday to take, and Annette Smith, the executive director of ECE, to take testimony regarding the health effects of 5G. The language that's presented in H.513 will provide for 5G rollout. It's exactly what the industry would like. Of course, you'd like to, they've stated just today, they'd like for you to instead actually defer to the FCC regulations that are in play. Senator Pearson raised a concern that, you know, those are an organic document. They evolve regulations into defer to a document that could evolve over time may not be appropriate. It is not appropriate. If you're going to defer to another document and incorporate that into your bill and make that part of your law, you need to specify a specific date that that document was adopted. And any future amendments to that law or regulation would not apply. So there's a rulemaking process that the PUC is about to embark on to address the rollout of all this, including 5G. Nobody seems to have done much in terms of studying the health effects of all this. And so I would ask that this legislature, that this committee, consider the changes I've offered here, that the bill is made clear on its face that it only applies to the rollout of optical fiber, and that it's supportive of that. If you go to section 19, I've dog-eared it in my markup of the bill. I've added language that,
Is there a next time you bring us one, if ever?
yeah,
Even when senators pass things out, we need to have our names on it, so I know who passed, where it came from, because otherwise I've got a bill.
oh, I thought
What
it
does
put,
say?
I thought it said proposed
It says
ECE amendment.
VCE, okay,
Yeah, no, I wouldn't do that.
okay.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
You should just write our names at the top, so I know that it goes with your testimony.
Oh, I see, I didn't,
Okay.
oh, I'm sorry, I said VC, okay.
Because it looks very much like it is, the bill.
Yeah, well, that's exactly.
Okay.
The legislature at this date, at this late date, and this committee is the only check on the rollout of this dangerous technology.
The Health and Welfare Committee, I was told, is taking testimony
They
on
are,
Friday.
that's correct, and up to this point. And thank you. That at very least requires beforehand evaluation of public health and safety implications of its ubiquitous deployment at near ground levels. And as was mentioned again yesterday and just today, Vermont is a state that is certified, that has certified to the FCC that it regulates pole attachments and therefore is not governed by the FCC declaratory ruling regarding pole attachment of small cell technology. And there's a link there, and Faith Brown has a copy of the digital form of this, and you can click on that link and get to that document. It lists Vermont among the other states, 20 some odd states that are certified. So what VCE requests is at H.513, it's the bullets at the bottom of my testimony, that H.513 be amended as provided in the attached markup, making clear that the intent of this bill is to assist in the deployment of optical fiber throughout Vermont. And as provided in the markup, suggested language changes are indicated, making clear that the one-touch make-ready changes to the law under the bill are limited to the deployment of optical fiber and fiber to premises. Under section 19, which directs the PUC to embark on rulemaking, I provide language which makes clear that the rulemaking process is to be directed at the deployment of optical fiber and fiber to premises development. With regard to 5G and 4G that can be upgraded to 5G, that the PUC commission, that I request that this committee consider the language I presented to you, which would require that the PUC commission a study to gather together and distill from the peer-reviewed studies available related to health and safety risks posed by 5G RF radiation. And I've provided an excerpt that's also on my version of H.513. I'll read it to you. It requires that the commission perform an independent study and report to assess peer-reviewed, non-industry funded public health and safety risk studies performed worldwide regarding 5G and other high-level radio frequency radiation. And that is to be completed by January 15th, 2020, and submitted to the Vermont General Assembly. No rule shall be developed for or application for a certificate of public good accepted for the review related to 5G or 5G upgradable 4G infrastructure deployment, infrastructure deployment prior to the authorization by the General Assembly after due consideration and public hearings on the completed study and the report's findings. So, you know, I guess in sum, I'd like to say we are at a real crossroads, panning way back just from even the subject matter of this discussion today. We all now are hearing about microplastics. That seems to be the theme, the environmental theme this year of concern. It's real. It's in all of our cells, it's in all of our drinking water, it's everywhere. This is a plastic technology rolled out in the mid-50s. We were told this is great. We were later told when the concerns were raised when I was here in the early 90s that we need to do something about plastic packaging, that it's recyclable. And that's when the plastic industry came out with that little triangle, assuring us and assuring them another 25 years of this. Now look where we're at. We've seen it with carbon, now we're too late with that. And this continues on and on. We were assured that pesticides are safe and don't need to be regulated. We know where that ended. And so on and so forth. I would ask that let's not make these same missteps again. We have time. The industry and the discussion has said this is not about 5G. So that means we have time. We have time to have the PUC take a look at this, look at independent studies around the world, take testimony, consider that, and see if this is real or not, or if it's what I call tin hat or tin hat fear-mongering. I would assure you it is not. I wouldn't be here today. My credibility is on the line here. And so I want to thank you for your time and consideration of my request.
Thank you, and I think what we'll do, I'm on health and welfare, we'll ask them to take a look at this and tell us what they think should be the next step in this context. And see, I think they'll probably like your language.
Oh, thank you, Madam Chair.
They're gonna take more in-depth testimony, and I have a feeling it might get kicked to the Department of Health to do the study, but we'll find out. Okay, well, other questions, anything? Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for your time.
Sorry about the computer glitches.
While we're changing, I think we've hit the wall, can we, is it, it's off? Okay,
I'll open the
good.
window.
It was freezing, now it's cooking.
Yes,
Okay,
yes.
Zachary, Tomanelli.
Hello.
Hello.
For the record, Zachary Tomanelli, Zach Tomanelli. I am the Communications and Technology Director for VPIRG, Vermont Public Interest Research Group. I want to thank the committee for having me in today. It's getting late on a Friday, so I think people are tired. I will keep this pretty high level and stick to the headlines, where we are on certain aspects of the bill, and try and keep it relatively brief. So just very top line, VPIRG is broadly supportive of H.513. That by no means means that it is a perfect bill. I think you have all heard a lot of suggestions for improvements, concerns. I'll touch on some specific thoughts that we have. And I think that there's room for definite improvement here. But overall, I would urge this committee to pass this bill and urge the Senate as a whole to pass this bill and do it this year. I think it's very important to get the ball rolling on this. This does represent, at least in our estimation, the most significant step that the legislature has taken in some time to advance broadband throughout the state. And waiting more to get this rolling is in our estimation, not a great idea. So, I think we heard yesterday that urgency is, what's being looked at here, but also being prudent and considering these changes. I have a whole, I've submitted written testimony. There's, extended soliloquy here on why broadband is important in the 21st century and the challenges facing Vermonters. I think this committee is all well versed on that by now, so I'm going to skip over all that. I think we all agree it's important, and there's too many Vermonters without access to affordable high-speed internet. In terms of why VPIRG, or Public Interest Research Group, we do think access to affordable high-speed internet is in the public interest. This actually isn't something particularly new. We've been working on connectivity issues actually for a while. I brought, just because sometimes props are fun, the 1987 VPIRG update, which includes a article here by Avram Pat, you may have heard of him, keeping phone service for everyone. And there's just a short passage here. The VPIRG board and staff have been discussing phone service for the past year, especially in light of very major changes which have been occurring in the telephone industry: deregulation, competition, and variety of service. We recognize that those who cannot afford basic phone services, these changes are of no use. We know that lack of phone service is a threat to the well-being of elderly and disabled Vermonters who need the access to these services to reach medical and emergency services, and who need to be able to communicate with friends and family. We know that low-income Vermonters who do not have phone are at a huge disadvantage trying to compete in the job market, et cetera, et cetera. I share that to share a little bit of history, but also you could substitute the word high-speed internet for phone in that paragraph and be where we're at today. Representative Pat thought at this time that the phone service was deregulated. He should see the broadband internet in 2019. As you pointed out, Madam Chair, the state is very constrained in what it can do to actually regulate internet service providers and build out broadband. So then the question becomes, what can we do? And from VPIRG's perspective, we think the solution lies in the state supporting community-owned fiber networks, community-owned broadband. And why we support H.513 is we think a lot of the provisions in this bill specifically do that. So I'm going to, at a high level, look at the various sections and explain how we think that does that and how it can be improved to do that better. And I'll just note, in terms of why community-owned broadband or community-owned fiber, the big problem that we're facing, right, is that there are houses or addresses that are not profitable for the larger telecoms to reach. While these community-owned networks, because they don't have to satisfy shareholders, are in a better position to reach these non-profitable locations. We also like community-owned networks because, as a consumer protection organization, these networks tend to be more affordable, provide higher speeds, they tend to have better customer service, and they have bedrock protections like net neutrality, data privacy. I also supplied, I'm not going to get deeply into it, but it is worth reading this study by from Harvard, from the Berkman Klein Center for Internet and Society Research on community-owned fiber networks and why they are superior for consumers to larger telecoms. So just leave that there. So with that sort of framework, I'm just going to dive into some of the larger components of the bill. So sections 2, 3, 4, 5, 8, 10, 11, 12, and 21 all in some way deal with increasing the funding for the connectivity fund via an increase on the universal service fund. We support efforts by the state to provide more funding for connectivity efforts, so we're happy to see this inclusion. I think it's been testified, it's obvious the state's not going to raise nearly enough funds to just issue grants as their way out of it. I think Stan testified earlier it would take 500 years to do that. So that's not the prudent approach, but grants can play an important role in feasibility studies and in subsidizing the infrastructure to those most highest cost, those most difficult to reach places. So on the point of infrastructure build out, we agree with testimony previously provided on the shortcomings of providing state money to support build out for technologies less than 25.3. And frankly, we are also supportive of raising the bar to 100 throughout the bill. So I think others have testified to that. We are on board with that as well. We shouldn't be providing state grants to the most outmoded technologies. That doesn't make sense. On the question of the feasibility studies, We also are supportive of money going to the feasibility studies. Now, what the exact percentages are there, I think there were some questions on infrastructure versus feasibility, how much money there. We don't have a strong position on what that is, but we do think there actually is space and a good reason to put some of this money toward feasibility studies. Basically, because this is a starting block for a lot of these community-owned startups. So if that being the case, if the decision is between putting these very limited funds toward existing companies potentially building outmoded technology or helping the next regional fiber network get the footing that it needs, we think that that makes sense. We also support all the parts of the bill about allowing, electric distribution to do the research that they need to see how if they can get involved in this space. There's the state study specifically that looks at that at sort of a broader, higher level. We think that that makes sense. And then finally, as to the question of whether the state should establish a position within the PSD to act as a resource for local ISP startups, I would say we're fairly agnostic on that part. We have heard from some of these community leaders that it would be helpful to have a resource in state government. Whether that should live in the PSD, whether that's a particular person, that's something that we would leave up to others. But we do think the concept of having a state resource that the next ECFiber or the Franklin Fiber, whoever it is, can go to and say, hey, how have other places gotten this started? What are the steps that we need to take? Okay, Section 13, allowing municipalities to enter into public-private partnership with an ISP, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It seems that this is already allowed under existing law. I think this section is just in the bill to make that sort of arrangement explicit. So we don't have an objection because I think it's already allowed by existing law. I would just echo the cautions of some others who have testified about municipalities entering into partnerships that eventually leave the private entity in charge of that infrastructure or in ownership of that infrastructure. So that's not really a recommendation for you all, but just I'm here that's just a general caution that I would throw out there. Okay, sections 15, 16, 17, and 18. This is the state revolving loan fund. This is the biggie as far as we're concerned. We're very supportive of the establishment of this program. I would go as far to say is if you pass nothing else, although you should pass the other stuff, but if you pass nothing else, establish this state revolving loan fund. I would say that this might be the most important section of the bill for jumpstarting these new community-owned networks. You've already heard from ECFiber, now CVFiber, perhaps the biggest impediment or biggest challenge that they face when they get started is to get from the initial conception to that bond market, to that stage. And the state providing that bridge funding could be a real game changer here. Now, I think you need to get that right. I would agree with testimony that you heard earlier today that doubling the maximum amount of the loans to $4 million makes sense, even if that means giving out less total loans. So I think it's 10 loans at 1.8, and we say 5 loans at $4 million. That may make sense. It's better to have, in our estimation, 5 loans with a high chance of success than 10 loans that may or may not fail. So that's all, although ultimately probably a question for VITA, what they're willing to loan out. I think, I think Stan maybe suggested doing things in tranches. I think that the committee should spend a lot of time looking at that and thinking about if they're going to make some changes there about raising the maximum loans. I also would agree with earlier testimony about looking at the restrictions around the loans. And I think, the Public Service Department, Clay, is aware of this. You should probably speak with him. But take another look at that section that was pointed out in earlier testimony on whether that's too restrictive and whether that it may hamper the very entities that we're trying to help with these loans. And then finally, sections 19 and 20, pole attachment reforms. We are supportive of these sections of the bill. We believe that they'll remove a barrier to these community-owned networks who are trying to string fiber to the poles. I'm not going to go into detail. You've heard from these entities themselves about why they think these pole attachment reforms are needed. I'll just say to kind of tie a bow on it and why it's important that the sections of these bill work together. If in a previous section we're investing in these community-owned startups and then we're not removing the red tape necessary for them to make them successful, we're potentially hampering our own investments. So I think it's important to put all the concepts of the bill together and understand that they kind of work in unison. So that's why I think the pole attachment reforms are important. I'm going to leave on just 2 additional points. One, you heard earlier testimony, not today, but a few days ago, about the issue of backup power for voice over IP telephones. I just want to note that that is also a concern for VPIRG, just as we're moving people to fiber optics and high-speed internet, which we think is good, that's why we're supporting this bill. We should just recognize what some of the vulnerabilities are along with that. Although I'll note, having a copper line into your house is a vulnerability because your house can also get fried by, lightning strike, but that's neither here nor there. But I just want to note our concern there, and I think, the committee should look at some of the recommendations there, although there is, a separate PUC workshop that's dealing with that, but just wanted to bring that up. And then finally, I'll leave you with the idea that this bill should very much be viewed as a first step. And I don't think anyone here is suggesting that, okay, we're going to pass this bill and then we're just all going to bask in the wonder of high-speed internet. It's all just going to, come to us in the next year or two. But I would just implore the committee and the legislature as a whole to listen and understand, what happens once this bill passes. And what I mean by that is there's going to be some groups that go out and do feasibility studies with this money. And they may come back from those feasibility studies and say it wasn't feasible. And it's really important to listen to why. Is it because they didn't have access to middle mile fiber? Is it because of the restrictions on, maybe the loan funding was too restricted? So there's going to need to be some understanding going forward of what is working, what isn't working, and I think continual updates to this particular statute and this concept. I think it's not anywhere near a one and done type thing, but an ongoing thing that the legislature will need to work on. So I appreciate the committee's time and attention to this matter, and like I said, we're broadly supportive. Happy to take any questions, but that's just where we're at.
Okay. Senator
So are you saying that SCODOT should not receive funds unless it meets the 100 standard?
That is correct. Yes, that's correct, yes.
Okay. Any other questions? Thank you. Michael Birnbaum.
I was going to say that I would be brief, but I've discovered that those who say they're going to be brief aren't always.
We have also noticed this.
I'm Michael Birnbaum. I live in Plainfield. I'm one of the owners of Cloud Alliance, which is a wireless internet service provider in central Vermont. We serve 14 towns for the last 15 years. I'm Plainfield's representative to the board of ECFiber, and you've heard from Jeremy yesterday, and I'm a great supporter of that. And I'm also the founder and owner of Kingdom Fiber, which is a public-private partnership company in the Northeast Kingdom. And I brought a map to show you, and I can send you a file, but just...
I remember years ago, was Kingdom Fiber doing...
You may be thinking of Northlink.
Okay, I think I am. It was a good 10 years ago.
That's about right.
Okay.
So I'll be my own Vanna White.
We might be able to have someone hold that
So,
for you.
if someone wants to, that's all right, but this is okay. So what you're looking at, the red lines on that map are state-owned or controlled dark fiber.
Thank you.
Thank you, Karen, appreciate it. Lovelier than Vanna.
She may not get up there again.
So this is state-owned, mostly state-owned fiber. Some of it isn't. This was the Northlink that I believe
Yeah.
you're referring to,
Yeah.
that went up here and went from Island Pond out to Troy.
Yes.
So that's owned by Northern Enterprises, a nonprofit organization. And then these were all funded by different organizations. Some of them were stimulus funded, some of them were funded by a private company, New Hampshire Optical Systems. Some of them were funded before stimulus under the EDA program or by NBRC. Regardless, all of them have agreements. The VTA built some of this and then built connectors and created this contiguous, cohesive network.
And that's fiber.
It's all dark fiber. It's all 144 strand fiber, and it's all on poles, and it's about 170 miles worth.
What's the orange here?
And I'm coming to that.
Okay, thank you.
And so I'll come to it in a bit. If you
Okay,
don't
yeah,
mind.
take your time, yeah.
Okay, so for the moment, That's Kingdom Fiber. And Kingdom Fiber is basically a startup. I have 15 years experience with my other company, but when I go to a bank and say, loan me some money so I can make this happen, they say, we don't care about what you did before. Who are your owners? Oh, they're not the same owners. Oh, it's a different company. And they say, okay, what's your collateral? And I say, well, it's fiber optics on poles. And they say, oh, what can we do with that? And then they say, well, can we see 3 years of financials? What's your revenue? And I can say, we're just starting, we don't have revenue yet. And they say, why would we want it? And then I tell them the whole story about how wonderful this is going to be, and they believe me. They say, yeah, it sounds like a fantastic project, and you have a really good business plan, and we can see that with your experience this is going to succeed, and we can see that you're going to have revenues that will cover all of our loan servicing, but we can't do it. And they just turn you down. And so I'm here to be an example, to describe an example of what this VITA broadband loan program is about. And I got the same call from Ted Brady, and we discussed what it would take, what would you need? And that 1.8 million came from me. So I apologize to those of you who want 4. The reason I said 1.8 to 2 million was because I had the benefit of already constructed fiber.
Yeah.
Now, if ECFiber down here wants to do that, they've got to pay for the fiber too. So the 4 million, I support what Stan said. I think that's right. I support what VPIRG said, Zach said. But I'm going to be one of the ones applying for 2 million because that's all I need, and why take on more debt than I need, right? So this is going to serve everyone that it passes. This is not going to serve whole towns like ECFiber is now doing. This is more like the early stages of ECFiber where they went where it could be paid for. So what is the orange? We got to it. This is Craftsbury. And last year, the town of Craftsbury and our company teamed up.
So that's how Craftsbury, all right.
And we got grants from Northern Border Regional Commission, USDA Rural Development, unconventional grants to build fiber in that town. And we built 15 miles of fiber in that, well, no, more than that. A whole bunch of fiber in that town, forget the mileage. And it doesn't cover every road, but it covered as much as we could get funding for. And this is going to serve more than 50% of the town and more than 90% of the town's businesses. And surprisingly, that little tiny town has 80 businesses. They're all little tiny businesses. They have a couple they have the college, they have the outdoor center, they have some big businesses, but they also have a lot of little ones, salons and construction companies and so forth. So that is going to generate economic development for that town. And that is a model for what can happen all along this network. Thanks, Karen. So that's what that orange is. All these, and they're color coded based on the funding from different grant organizations. So
are you the principal person that pulled this together because we've heard about the Craftsbury model a few times.
Well, it was collaboration. But I was the spark plug.
Yeah, okay, that's
all right.
Thank you.
And it came out of a process from Vermont Council of Rural Development. And Craftsbury identified broadband as one of the 3 most important things they wanted, and they formed a committee, and I was on the committee, and that helped. So we are now installing there. It's taken a long time. Make Ready was one of the reasons it took a long time, so I echo everything you've heard about Make Ready. It's a serious obstacle to getting these things constructed. My main reason for being here today, I could go through every bit of the bill. I support the entire bill. There are things I would change. I would certainly, sorry I've been staring only in one direction. I would certainly make improvements if I was the czar. I did have a hand in making some improvements at the House level, and pass this bill whatever way you can now. If you want to make it better next year. Don't wait. We need these benefits that are in the bill now. In particular, the loan program. The VITA sponsored loan program. That's the most significant way you can advance broadband in the state. Whether it's for a communications union district like ECFiber, that's
I
plenty.
think Van is getting
Appreciate
tired.
it. Whether it's a communications union district, community fiber, or whatever we want to call it, or a private company like mine, either way, it's going to work. In both cases, it's about the smaller startups. Even if we're talking about 6 counties together, we're still small compared to Comcast, we're small compared to AT&T, we're small compared to Consolidated. They can go out and get their funding. They don't have a problem finding funding to do what they want to do. And they're going to do whatever is best for their ROI, quarterly reports to their shareholders. We have a different constituency. We just want to serve everybody in these towns and develop further economic development, particularly in all these towns that are shrinking, and they're shrinking because there's a lot of factors, and the whole legislature is steeped in this idea right now. But very important is the broadband infrastructure in terms of what kind of business can develop in any town. And yes, we're selling the idea to the customers that you can stream Netflix to your heart's delight. But the true mission is to develop the economics of the state. And so I'll mention 5G for a second.
Okay, you're brave.
I'm not afraid of that. I don't know if 5G is good or bad. I'm in the wireless business too. This bill is not about 5G. All the things that this bill frees up is not about 5G. 5G is largely going to show up in the urban areas of the United States, and in some cases where industrial farms need it. It's not going to be a major thing in Vermont. Chuck might say otherwise.
No, actually, they pretty much said not in my lifetime.
Yeah, I don't see how the densification that's required in 5G is going to show up here. It may show up in Burlington, but it's not what this is about, what this bill is about. And if you have concerns about potential health issues, which are very theoretical, and I won't let others decide that, and that doesn't need, you don't need to modify this bill to accommodate that investigation. That can be a separate investigation, and if they find some horrible thing, you can always come back and change your laws. So that's my comment on 5G. I'll take any questions.
Just a couple questions. I'll make the point that I made yesterday. The timing of our deliberation can seem confusing and stressful from the outside. I don't see any scenario where this bill does not move. And so I am not comfortable with the idea that we should move it as it is and not try to make it better.
That's wonderful.
So I would welcome, if you have it in paper form, we don't need to go through it now, in fact, we can't go through it now, suggestions that you offered to the House bill to make it better. You seem like one of the on-the-ground practitioners that we're trying to facilitate. So I would personally really value that, and if you could.
Some of it's in the public record, though a lot of it was sort of like phone calls to representatives.
Okay,
Well, maybe you
any comments you
summarize
can email to Faith,
All
and
right.
she will get them to us.
I do have, though, a specific question. This is around the, because I'm struck that your project is in some of the least dense areas of the state.
This is the least.
Up when you get up into Essex County. And I've been really struggling with this 100, 24, 4, 10, 1. I don't know how I go to somebody who has no internet and tell them, sorry, we weren't comfortable investing in anything less than cutting edge. On the other hand, I don't know how you straight face say to people we're investing in 30-year-old technology, and it's an impossible situation. So can you just walk me through your thinking as somebody who
Stan said I was going to have a different opinion, so here we go. 100 is wonderful, and we're gonna achieve that wherever we go with fiber. It's easy. And 10.4.1 and 10.1 are a waste of time. And the reason those numbers exist is because DSL wasn't capable of high upload speeds. And so both at the federal level and at the state level, there was reason to protect the lives of these companies. Not all of them monster Verizon, some of them Shoreham Tel, small telephone companies. And so in order to protect those companies, they set the standards to give them a chance to continue to thrive and invest in future fiber, perhaps. The fact that they chose not to or were unable to means, well, we can't keep on doing that. At some point, you have to say, this is inadequate. And so 4.1 and 10.1 standards are not appropriate anymore, and the state shouldn't fund those. The FCC is funding 10.1 right now under the CAF program, and there are other programs that are funded at that level. 25.3 is similar in that it's protecting telephone companies as well for where when they bond copper or do more advanced DSL. The lower 3 is to protect them because the technology doesn't really do symmetrical. But I'm sure you've heard from Irv and others that upload speed is really important. It's really important for companies. It's really important for telemedicine. It's really important for a lot of functions. So here's the other part of it. Fiber to the home over the long term, except to the very, very, very isolated locations, is the most economical thing you can do. Because you can amortize it out 20, 40 years, and it actually is economical. But it's so capital intensive, and so hard to raise that money, and speaking to what you're saying about people who have nothing and telling them they have to wait until somebody has enough money to do the whole thing, there is some logic to say wireless can be the bridge to that. I don't think DSL can, because DSL can't get it's at its limits in terms of what it can be improved, what levels it can improve. Whereas wireless continues to improve. When I'm saying wireless, you always think, I know all of you do, cell phones. You're thinking mobile wireless, but fixed wireless is really, really important. Fixed wireless means an antenna fixed on the house or on the business, aimed at a tower, always getting a strong signal, bigger antenna than the one that's in a phone. Fixed wireless really works. And if you're only going to be funding fixed wireless ISPs like mine that delivers 6 megs down, you're wasting your money. You shouldn't do that. You have to hold them to a higher standard because the technology is evolving. And you can now get radios that'll do 25. And you can now get radios that'll do 100. They're very expensive, but they're getting cheaper every year. And the reason wireless is worth investing in sometimes is that you can get in there cheaper, you can build it, you can build 5 times as much territory out, and then in 5 years, you can replace some of that equipment with the next iteration because it continues to evolve, the antenna technology continues to evolve. So you could end up with 100 radios at lots of houses with fixed wireless, and over the long run, I think it'll cost a little more. But you didn't have the CapEx at the beginning, and so you've gotten it out to those places that have nothing. So what's King & Fiber going to do? I mean, wireless is my thing, and why am I doing fiber? Well, fiber's the ultimate game, or it may not even be. There may be something else, but for now, it's the ultimate game. But we're not going to cover everything, so we're going to do fiber, and we're going to extend it with wireless, and then when we can get funding to go into those areas, we'll replace that wireless with fiber.
Okay.
And so that's a way.
24.4 would be the lowest you would advocate we put in here?
25.3 is the federal definition of broadband at the moment, and the reason for the 3 is the one I explained before. The state could choose to pick a higher upstream speed, but maybe to be consistent with the Fed's 25.3, it's not inappropriate in my mind.
Okay, other questions? Right, thank you.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Okay, Jamie Feehan.
Thanks for your, that was very helpful. That was very good.
No, there's any questions, we've got to get the answer.
Good afternoon, Jamie Feehan with Fiber on behalf of the 12 municipal members of the Vermont Public Power Supply Authority. I'd like to speak specifically only to section 11 of the bill today, which is, begins on page 12. This is the feasibility study for electric companies offering broadband service in Vermont. And the municipal members don't oppose the study. In fact, I think it's a good thing, but I'm here to ask you for a little bit more guidance, perhaps, for the DPS in conducting this study. As you know, there are a number of differences among the electric utilities in this state. There's the investor-owned, there's the cooperative-owned, there's the municipal-owned. You know, just that very structure is a difference. We have differences in financing. We have no shareholders as municipals, for example. The rate base is our source of revenues in addition to the bond market and other lenders. There's differences in terrain. There's differences in service territories. Differences in terms of where we're located around the state. Even within the municipals, there are differences. Some, for example, like Johnson, contains solely within the village boundaries. Others, like Swan, it's owned by the village of Swan, but serves the town and a few other towns around the village. Those owners in Swan make the decisions for the surrounding towns, but those ratepayers aren't always the same taxpayers, for example. So what I'd like to do, if I could, is suggest two minor instances of amendment that sort of reflect this difference. The bill directs the DPS to conduct a study, and it references, you know, the impact on electric rates and the financial risk to electric companies, but these other differences that I've mentioned we think should also be considered by the DPS as it conducts this study. And further down in B, rather than representatives of utilities, we'd ask that, you know, representatives from each utility actually be consulted by the DPS. We don't think that's a big ask. Because of the differences among utilities, we think it's important because we do think this is a very, you know, potentially a big study with a big impact, as you all have expressed as well. We've shared this language and concept with the Department of Public Service. Obviously, they can speak for themselves, but they have no objection intent, but you all make the final decisions, of course, so we certainly ask for your willingness to adopt these.
May I ask, Jamie, were you in, is that okay, Madam Chair?
Yes.
Were you in here yesterday when Leslie Nolte testified?
I was not able to be here.
Okay, so she is with ECFiber, and she was saying that from her perspective, she didn't feel like the feasibility study made any sense at this point because we have a sense industry-wide that it isn't useful to pursue this, so I'm just curious.
Well, you know, I mean, I don't know that the municipals would share that view. You know, there may be the opinion of some utilities or some that it's not necessary, but I don't think that is, I don't think that's universally shared by, certainly by the VPPSA members.
Okay.
And I think that's kind of what gets to our proposed amendments to make sure, frankly, that we're part of that discussion.
Okay.
Okay. Other questions?
Thanks for your time. I
Okay,
appreciate it.
thank you. Next up, Garrett Ryan. Garrett, you're here, okay. And Garrett, I've seen you in the room, but I don't know if you know we just asked you to introduce yourself for the record. And then if you represent anybody or any affiliate, let us know who we are.
I'm Garrett Ryan. I'm myself.
Citizen.
Okay.
Citizen, right?
Yeah, citizen.
Citizen works.
So, I guess I'm here to talk about fiber and wireless and the connection between the two. There's a good quote by Isaac Asimov that comes to my mind. The saddest aspect of life today is that science gathers knowledge faster than society gathers wisdom. And the only thing that's really changed since then is man's ability has greatly outpaced its sanity. And I don't believe this is sustainable any longer. A brief review. You have the International Agency of Cancer 2011 marking RF as possible human carcinogen, class 2B. Many people before and after said it should be class 1. I think the literature supports that. You have the California Medical Association passed Resolution 107-14, which pretty much corroborates anything I might tell you. You can look this up.
Just to clarify, so what is the carcinogen? What's causing? What do
He's
you-
saying RF.
RF.
The
Like
radiation,
if there's
non-ionizing
reaction.
radiation,
Thank you.
low intensity, athermal,
Thank you.
RF. Pretty much, so yeah, California Medical Association pretty much corroborating what I might give you a whole list of ways this can act upon the human body. I have pediatric neurologists at Massachusetts General Hospital, Martha Herbert, Harvard trained and so on, pretty much saying don't do this, don't put this around kids, don't put it in the schools. You have the American Association for Justice breaking down the FCC and the way that they should be behaving, but they're not behaving. And
Can you leave us copies of those? And
yes, I can provide you a,
just
you
one
can make
copy,
copies.
or you can, yeah, no, we
I
will
will
make
make them
copies, or you
digitally.
can email them
Right.
to Faith, and then we'll all have them in our
Okay.
files.
And the country with the oldest safety standard, occupational safety standard for exposure to RF is Russia, 1958. We followed in the early 70s, to my recollection. Under the WHO, they replicated the experiments that underpinned their safety standard, which was 1,000 times lower than ours, and is now 100 times. And a breakdown of the FCC by Norm Alster of Harvard Ethics, and there's a lot to go into in that. So fiber optics, how does that play in? Pretty much fiber optics, as all of you know, is the spine for 5G, it's fiber backhaul. Without it, it wouldn't be possible. So any attempt to put in fiber, any installation of fiber should be backed by strong legal underpinnings that prevent it from being repurposed, used in another way. There are technologies like AirGate from AT&T, which essentially they're just mounted on top of poles. Instead of running fiber, you would it uses the power lines as a waveguide for millimeter waves, and it's just a transceiver, just bounces the signal forward instead of running hard infrastructure. The ecological effects of that would be devastating. Active denial, let's go into that. Our best data on millimeter waves comes from Brooks Air Force Base early on, later on not so much, and the Soviets. This is a declassified CIA document, a review of literature done on the effect of low intensity millimeter waves, the same intensity and the same character we'd be exposed to, phase array, pulse type, beamforming, all the rest of it, technology. Pretty much they found broad degenerative changes in the organs of these animals, demyelination, peripheral nerves, so on and so forth. They looked at humans, people occupationally exposed. This is, the title of this is Translations on USSR Science and Technology, Biomedical Science. Effects of non-ionizing electromagnetic radiation, 1977. And I'll provide a whole manifest of all these documents.
Okay. That would be helpful.
In 1993, there was a review of the total body of Soviet literature, and that goes into human studies, effects on humans. Pretty much, it acts the way that we would expect it to. And lastly, pathologic effects of radio waves. That also has a lot of data in it. It was published in 1973, I believe, by Russian researchers. A number of papers have come out that show that 5G would actually exceed thermal guidelines that are established, which are already invalid. So you would have heating-based damage, and this can happen in a very short amount of time. That paper was called Systematic Derivation of Safety Limits for Time-Varying 5G Radio Frequency Exposure Based on Analytical Models and Thermal Dose. And there's too much to go through, I think, in 5 minutes, but you have your Streamlined Small Cell Deployment Act, S3157, which pretty much just builds on the language of the 1996 Telecommunications Act, except it shifts it up to like Section 7, instead of Section 704 or subsection whatever. It pretty much says that the infrastructure is there, you're legally not allowed to refuse a tower. They can put one in your front yard. Any argument based on health effects or effects to the environment, ecological effects, is invalid, and it's federally preempted, local zoning. They actually plug the loophole which allows you to have historical sites, tribal lands, whatever, as a preemption, as a legal faculty for zoning, I guess I say. So that was, and I guess the bizarre thing is the time scale. How much data we have around 100 years of data. Research on these emissions started well before these devices were even conceived of, well before they existed. This is the Naval Medical Research Institute. There was, I think, 6 more supplements to this. This is the second version. It has 2,311 citations in it, and that was published in 1972. We already had a substantial body of work domestically and abroad. The Soviets started well before we did, and you can look at the Moscow signal event if you want some background on that. They were beaming our embassy in Moscow. It was the Cold War, and they wanted to know what we knew or what we didn't know, or how we react. We have mechanistic studies that show how this works. Actually, the Soviet data is a lot better for this, but radio frequency fields, existing infrastructure, we know how it works. It acts on various structures in the body, but most importantly, the voltage sensing subunit of the calcium channel, which controls the flow of ions in and out of the cell. Well, not out, they're pumped out by pumps, but it controls the influx. But that has a number of effects, most of them damaging and pathological. We're already seeing signs of that. Insects have been studied, effects on insect life. The absorption in insects in the range of 5G would occupy can be upwards of 130% higher than presently used devices in frequencies. That would be disastrous. Insect populations are plummeting globally, around 90% by some measures. You can look that up. There's a ton of studies hit just recently, but it was reported a long time ago, and the trend has actually continued. And in Vermont in particular, insects eating birds are down by upwards of 70% in some species, 30 to 70%. But we are seeing ecological effects. We're seeing what we would expect to be seeing. It is there, it is happening, and will continue. What are we going to do about it? Are we going to just dig ourselves deeper into a dead-end pit of mediocrity like we have been and just go along with it? We need a better approach. And we need to make sure that you don't have federal preemption and legal faculty to just install whatever once we get the infrastructure in. For fiber. Fiber is the way to go. It should not be wireless. The data supports that.
Thank
let
you.
me
You've
check my
done
notes for
an
one.
amazing amount of research.
Brooks Air Force Base, I want to just have a quick note on that. It's hard to go into the history on that, but pretty much the Russians found that a lot of the millimeter wave effects were not present if you didn't have a complex tissue organized as it would be in communicating, the cells actually communicating the way they would be in natural tissue. If you just have them in a petri dish, some effects will appear in a very narrow band, others just won't. So that would explain a lot of the Brooks Air Force Base results in the early 80s, mid 80s. Are there any questions?
I don't think so. I think
Very
you've given us a lot to wade through. What led you to do all this research?
Around 6 years ago, my mother ran into somebody that told her about it. There's a lot going on at the time. It was kind of a nuisance to me. It's obnoxious that she was so concerned about these things. I didn't really know about it. I actually argued with the guy. I talked to him probably once total. Argued with him, but I'd known about a lot of studies done on MRI operators showing deficits in working memory in particular. I knew about transcranial magnetic stimulation, and so I got into that more, and I continued to do research. I think it really started when I found this paper in 2013 called Electromagnetic Fields Act via Activation of Voltage Calcium Channels to Produce Beneficial or Adverse Effects. That's what really got me into this, and it was the gateway to a lot of other data I wouldn't have found otherwise.
Are you going to be able to leave us a copy, or at least?
Yes.
Okay, that would be great. What I'm going to do is.
Bulk of the documents I have are digitally available.
Okay, if you can send us a link to those. The Health and Welfare Committee, Senator Lyons is a former professor, loves reports.
You'll be very interested in this.
She will read every one of them, and we're going to be looking at 5G and the health implications. So I will get that if you email it to Faith or, who's our committee assistant. We will I'll get that down to her, we'll ship it down and we'll get that into the health record. Okay?
Thank you for your time.
Thanks, Garrett.
Thank you.
Appreciate you all listening. Yeah, thank you very much for coming in.
Helpful. Committee. Geez, you're getting out early, don't get used to it.
I know.
Next Thursday, we're going to book some time to do the governmental appointments. So check with Faith, let Faith know that if you don't know what you've got, let her know who's completed. We'll get those done and upstairs. I've got 2 for my other committee I'm still working on. I'm trying to get some time in for committee discussion. We have vapes we need to get out, and I need to know if we're seriously looking at any amendments to that. What else have we got to get out of here?
This is just.
You've got my schedule, all right. Okay, we're gonna start looking at pharmacy benefit managers. We may not have, we won't have time to do a whole lot. The ed financing bill, we have somebody from eBay who wants to talk to us that has marketplace money is folded into the numbers in the ed financing, but it's usually our yield set. Yes, we've put H.513 from today on for a vote. We have another one on Tuesday, neonicotinoid pesticides, I believe that's what's killing bees. There's a fee, I'm sure, in there, we're gonna go through that. Okay, Reach Up and the Reach Up Ahead pilot, that's the cars. I just wanna get it out of here. And then, yeah, on Tuesday, we're gonna take our walk through transportation, and just see what's in there. I'm sure there's some fees somewhere that we're gonna have to do. Vapes is on for a vote, if possible, but we'll have discussion, but let me know if anybody wants some amendments on that bill, or if we're gonna do it as is. Fees, I need a committee discussion about what we wanna do with fees.
Judiciary, is that?
That's all the fees, that's the executive and judicial branch. Then we have 524, which is the association health plans. Representative Lippert is getting a little nervous. Okay, and then we've got, I know Brian Shoup wants to come in, we seem to be on the revenue bill with the land gains tax. I would like to exclude primary dwellings or any house on which you subdivide it and somebody puts in their primary dwelling. I don't-
But it's in the law. That second part is in the law.
It's
The law.
in the present law,
Yeah.
not in the proposed changes. That was the discussion yesterday. Yeah, so I don't wanna start taxing a whole group of people we haven't taxed.
So, if I could, Madam Chair,
Yes.
you talked about, planning on being here not this coming Monday, but the following 2 Mondays. And I'm just curious, is that an all-day meeting or what?
Probably not, since I found out the appointment, I thought I had Monday is the next Monday. So I'll probably, if we do Monday, it'll be later in the afternoon. But if people can't make it, we'll see how we're working through the bills. The big questions we've got are, we've got to find money to do the medical deduction.
Yep.
That's gonna be the big fundraiser. And that, we're gonna have to find some. I think we may need to do some money for the budget, depending on what happens with the child care bill. We're
But the
still-
pharmacy piece is out?
No, the pharmacy piece, right now what I found out, it is illegal for us to know what the spread is, so it's very hard to tax it. If you are contracted with them, unless the contract provides that you can know what the spread is, you can't know what the spread is. So we may do some work on that, but I thought we'll at least start, my intent would be next year, we just haven't looked at pharmaceuticals in years. And I'm very uncomfortable with their going without putting a little pressure on them. So, we'll start
And the
taking a
Faber
look
check.
there.
One thing that I'm gonna have to add is an amendment to broadband bill to deal with the statewide telecommunications plan. that we
Okay,
discussed.
yes, I think that's a
I should
given,
have
yeah.
that drafted by
Yeah.
Monday. And what we've done with Senator White, who's taking part of this, is they're gonna take up the E911 issue and if we take up the telecommunications.
Did meet with Robert Dostis today, works Green Mountain Power, and I mentioned that there was some concern that when the power goes down, the new cell phone systems, he said he's the guy that calls the state and emergency management and everybody else, to tell them when there's a power outage, and you'd have no problem calling the 911 board. So at least they, you know, it's not much they can do, but at least they know that there's a possible issue in the area that doesn't have power. I know I get emails from Robert, so I'm sure most of you do.
Yes, I do.
And there's
I don't know how
there's-
much, Senator White's gonna do about
Okay.
that issue. My understanding is that the administration has got a recommendation regarding coming back to her committee with a governance issue, interim
Okay.
solution, and that's what I think they're gonna deal with, what they do about it.
Okay, that's all, yes, that will deal in. And then I think the big lift will be the revenue bill. So we will go through this. We do have a little expungement, we didn't have time to do that, until Wednesday, but that's the one that came from judiciary. There's a fund set up in it so that, I guess, if we do this expungement, did they say there was 35,000, people with 10-year-old DUIs, and they expected about 3,500 would be in there first day, and that they're looking for some money to fund the cost. Okay. Okay, thank you. Peter, do I have another meeting?
No.
I don't?
Yes. Thank you.
Okay.